Good morning. Good morning. How's everybody today? Good morning, Megan. If you haven't figured out, we're going to be talking about sunflowers today. For the folks at home who don't know, we are at Community Unitarian Universalist Church in Plano, Texas. My name is Ina McBride, and I am but one member of a team that is working to bring this service to you wherever you may be. I want to take a moment to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who's visiting us today, here or online. And also, I want to join me in welcoming our guest pianist this morning, Gay Worley. Rather than gathering because we all have the same beliefs, we are an intentional community gathered around our shared promise to support each other's spiritual journeys. We're also intentional about bringing all ages together. In today's world, that often doesn't happen. But we think that it's important to have an adult friend ask a child or a youth how they did on that science test they were worried about, or a 30-year-old and a 70-year-old chatting about life while having coffee after the service. Here at Community, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. Today, we are privileged to have back with us again our guest speaker, Reverend Lora Brandis. Reverend Brandis is community minister who provides preaching to local congregations and serves as an on-call hospital chaplain. She is the part-time Faith Forward coordinator for First Unitarian Church in Dallas and a certified spiritual director. 2 days a week, she and her husband Frank take care of twin grandchildren, Rose and James. Yeah, that's a joy, isn't it? Lora previously served congregations in Utah, Idaho, California, and Texas. I know we're all looking forward to her message a little later in the service. Welcome. Let there be joy in our coming together this morning. Let there be truth heard in the words that we speak and the songs that we sing. Let there be help and healing for our disharmony and despair. Let there be silence for the voice within us and beyond. Let there be joy in our coming together. Our chalice lighting this morning will be done by Sarah Reiling.
Out of the darkness, light. Out of the light, warmth. Out of the warmth, joy. Out of the joy, togetherness. May this flame hold us for the time we are here with one another.
A covenant is not a definition of a relationship. It's the framework for our relating. It is humble towards evolution. It leaves room for chance and change. It claims, I will abide with you in this common endeavor and be present as best as I can in our becoming. A covenant invites relationship. This calls for a level of trust, courage, and sacrifice that needs to be nurtured, renewed, and affirmed on a regular basis. That's why we remind ourselves as a community of this promise to each other every week. Please recite to each other this, our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
I am not a gardener. I cannot believe that is the line I wrote to be the first line of my sermon after you had this great presentation on your community garden and what great gardeners you have here. But it's true, that is the first, there it is, first sentence. I am not a gardener. Just because there are plants growing in my yard does not make me a gardener. We have non-volunteer sunflowers in our backyard, meaning our human hands did nestle the seeds in the ground. We were so proud of our sunflower success last summer that we have nestled even more seeds in the ground this year. They are about a foot tall right now. I know because I went out and measured them yesterday. We have tomatoes, which we've never had much success with, peppers, and basil. Now, we once found a volunteer basil plant in the front yard, seemingly having traveled all the way from our back patio. Bless the basil because it grows without any help from us. My sister is a gardener. Her 800 square foot garden thrives in the Texas Hill Country, I know. We try to visit at least one time during the growing months so that we can come home with bags of tomatoes, green beans, summer squash, and okra. Now, I had never seen an okra blossom until my sister's garden, and apparently you have seen them here. They're pretty magnificent, aren't they? I had never seen one. That was an unexpected joy. I wish I was the kind of skilled gardener my sister is. But we're not supposed to compare ourselves to each other, are we? Comparison kills joy. Comparison, or envy, gets its own chapter in the Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World, by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, written with their friend Douglas Abrams. Now, think of this as the big Book of Joy, the adult version of the children's book that Ina read this morning, the Little Book of Joy. Douglas Abrams points out in this whole chapter on envy that comparison is indeed human, even beyond human. It is natural throughout the animal world. As the Dalai Lama would point out, even dogs that are eating together peacefully can suddenly start comparing the size of their portion to another's. And a fight can break out with barking and the gnashing of teeth. Now, in the big Book of Joy, we get to listen to this week of dialogue that the writer Douglas Abrams records for us. Interviewed the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop, interviewed them about joy. He was asking them questions about what blocks joy and what spiritual practices can sustain joy. And throughout the book, you can hear the difference in their theologies. If envy gets in the way of your joy, the Dalai Lama suggests a preventive practice of meditation so that your thinking is more positive and your feelings are less primed to be so reactive. The Archbishop didn't like labeling any emotion as negative. But when challenging emotions naturally arise, we can be open to self-examination that results in acceptance and self-forgiveness. The poet Mary Oliver wrote, "Joy is not made to be a crumb." The poet James Cruz answers her. But isn't that how it often shows up at first? One crumb of attention, then another and another, until you're able to follow the trail leading to the volunteer sunflower you hadn't noticed, blooming by the garden. So what exactly is joy? Is it different from happiness? Yes. Some would say that joy is different from happiness. Some researchers would say that happiness relies more on current circumstances. Joy is deeper, more spiritual, more connected to each other and all that is. Abrams, in the Big Book of Joy, quotes Paul Ekman, famed emotions researcher and longtime friend of the Dalai Lama. He has written that joy is associated with feelings as varied as pleasure, amusement, contentment, excitement, relief, wonder, ecstasy or bliss, exultation, radiant pride, unhealthy jubilation, or Schadenfreude, elevation, and gratitude. Now, I recently learned a new term, Freudenfreude. Have you heard this? Am I alone in my new just hearing this? Freudenfreude. I heard it from a German colleague. I kid you not. It is the opposite of Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is relishing in someone else's suffering, unhealthy jubilation. You never do that, right? No. But Freudenfreude is the feeling of joy or pleasure that comes from another person's success or good fortune, even if it doesn't directly affect you. Freudenfreude. Now, the Buddhists also have a term for this, and they call it mudita. Mary Oliver also wrote, if you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give into it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. We do often hesitate to feel joy, don't we? Especially now. How dare we feel joy when the world is on fire? How can we feel joy when so many are suffering? How can we allow ourselves to feel joy when we thought there were reasons for joy, when we didn't hesitate, in a season that seems so long ago now? We were promised that joy would come in the morning, and it didn't. Psalm 30, verse 5. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning, was quoted a lot at the Democratic National Convention last summer. Do you remember? Suddenly, there was a candidate whose platform was joy. The pundits declared that joy is not a good political strategy. I guess they were right. What do we do now that joy did not come in the morning? We cultivate it. We turn towards it like a flower turning towards the sun. There are spiritual practices that can help us cultivate joy, practices that can help us turn towards joy. The Dalai Lama and his friend, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, can help us cultivate joy. We begin, perhaps counterintuitively, by acknowledging pain. In his conversation with the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Tutu said, "I think we ought not to make people feel guilty when it is painful. It is painful, and you have to acknowledge that it is painful." He goes on to say, "The thing is, don't feel guilty. We have no control over our feelings. Emotions are spontaneous things that arise." Now, Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama can teach us how to cultivate joy, but they will not always agree. Their traditions have different approaches. The Dalai Lama's tradition teaches lojong, mind training, that can help us have control over our emotions and lessen our self-absorption. The Archbishop's tradition teaches offering up pain and suffering to Jesus so it can be used to help the world. The result is the same: compassionate concern for others leads to joy. Both these men know a little bit about pain. Well, they know a lot, actually. They are not holy men making pronouncements from on high to those of us laboring away with the daily obstacles to joy. Archbishop Tutu died in December of 2021 from cancer. And as we know, he was a respected religious leader who guided his people through the tough years of apartheid in South Africa. After apartheid was dismantled, he chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which encouraged those responsible for human rights abuses to fully disclose their activities. Forgiveness will come in the form of a legal amnesty from prosecution, and restitution would come with the perpetrators making amends to their victims. He listened to the stories of horrible murders and abuses in his role as chair, but still, he believed that people are good. They were made good, and they really want to be good. After leading a very sheltered life as the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama, which I love that we saw those two boys growing up in different circumstances, the Dalai Lama was forced into politics when the Chinese invaded Tibet. For 9 years, he tried to negotiate on behalf of his people. But after a violent uprising, he decided to lead his people into exile. And that was 66 years ago. Living in exile as a refugee connects him to the suffering of the world in ways that he might not have otherwise been connected. Now, in the big book of joy, there are spiritual practices to cultivate what they identified as the 8 pillars of joy. Here's the 8 pillars of joy: perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. And gardening. No, that's not on the list. But gardening is one of the incitements of joy that Ross Gay writes about in his book of essays on joy, which I highly recommend to you. Ross Gay, Incitements of Joy. He tells the story of how during the COVID lockdown, he wandered around his very crowded yard looking for another place to plant. he noticed an unlikely spot, a gravel-filled strip between the raised beds and the alley. After borrowing his neighbor's pickaxe, he dug a 6-inch trench. He writes, "Then I filled that trench with planting mixes I scrounged from the garage before planting a bunch of sunflowers with seeds we had in our stash that we'd never gotten around to using. The seeds were 4 or 5 years old, and I was planting them in a gravel trench. And although planting seeds is always an act of faith, this qualified maybe a little extra. The sunflowers grew. Nothing ate them. They kept growing. There was enough rain. There was enough sun. They kept growing. In a few months, he says, there was a gorgeous family of mismatched sunflowers lining his alley. Bees visited and pollinated. In the fall, the goldfinches visited to get their fill of the seeds, sometimes distributing volunteer plants from seeds, hastily dispersed during their feeding frenzy. Joy was in abundance. Now, Ross Gay tells the story of his sunflower success, and then he asks the question we may all be thinking when we hesitate to feel joy. Yeah, but isn't gardening a privilege? He asks on our behalf. How could he be talking about gardens at a time like this? He writes, going on to say, by which you mean the experiences I'm talking about, and which I'm saying are connected to joy, are not afforded to those who do not have access to a garden, green space, etc. Gardens and joy, the question understands, are privileges. You would be right, he would say, but don't get so comfortable with your correctness that you miss the larger point. He would also say, the larger point is this: to be without a garden or green space or access to a park or clean water or health care or health is violence, he says. It is a disprivilege. Life, he says, though it is a gift, is not a privilege. If we want to have access to more joy for not only ourselves, but for all beings, then we can work to get rid of disprivilege. There is a quote that became very popular on social media after all the joy was unleashed this past summer. It's this: joy doesn't betray, but sustains activism. And when you face a politics that aspires to make you fearful, alienated, and isolated, joy is a fine initial act of insurrection. The quote is from activist writer Rebecca Solnit's book, Hope in the Dark. She wrote the book in 2016 to inspire tired activists in 2016 with stories of past victories. She wanted to inspire activists 9 years ago so they could resist falling into despair. She called for a commitment to hope that keeps us in the struggle even when we may never see the outcome of our efforts. It is okay to experience joy amid all this pain, ours and the world's. In fact, she says, joy is a fine initial act of insurrection. Insurrection is a word that carries a different weight than it did 9 years ago. 9 years ago, we didn't expect an insurrection and a threat to our democracy that never seems to go away. We didn't expect a global pandemic. We didn't expect joy would attempt a comeback and fail. I may not be a gardener, but I know a little bit about joy. I know joy cannot be forced, as in, get over it, move on. Can't we all just get along? Slowly, resisting the urge to succumb to despair, we turn towards joy. Slowly, resisting the demand to ignore the painful truth, we turn towards joy. Instinctively, we turn towards joy together, like a gorgeous family of flowers turning towards the sun. May it be so, and amen.
Please recite together the words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. You can prepare, but still it will come to you by surprise. Crossing through your doorway, calling your name in greeting, it will astonish you how wide your heart will open in welcome for the joy that finds you so ready and yet still so unprepared. There are miles behind you and many more ahead. As you journey on towards wholeness, may all that is good and true guide your way. May the joy of love lighten every step, and the miracle that is life be ever in your sight. Amen.